Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody. It's just before 7 o'clock, and I'm just getting myself all set up here. If you can just have a look behind me, you'll see the sea. My husband and I celebrated our 9th wedding anniversary yesterday, and so we have come away for a couple of days. Sorry, I just need to plug the mic in quickly. There we go, that's better. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Arise with Sally Goodwin on this beautiful Thursday morning. My husband and I celebrated our 9th wedding anniversary yesterday, and so we've come away for a couple of days to Fontaine, just to, he loves to celebrate. He loves to celebrate me, and he loves to celebrate our marriage and our wedding anniversary, and he's such a romantic. And I'm not always very romantic, but he is such a romantic. So he loves to even if it's just for a day or two, to come away and celebrate, So we're in Fontaine just for a day or two, and then we're going back home again. But I had committed to do this Facebook Live this morning, so I figured, okay, we'll just do it in Fontaine. Why not? So good morning, everybody. It's so good to see you all. Welcome back to Arise with Sally Goodwin, where we have been talking about the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. And we have on Tuesday, the video that I did just explained all about Chanukah and where it comes from and how the Jewish people reached this point, etc., etc. Thank you so much, Candace. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, morning, Jenny. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Yes. We are very blessed and very grateful. And for those of you who didn't see, I posted a video on my Arise with Sally Goodwin page yesterday. It's an interview that I did with Tanya Botha. Tanya Botha runs a ministry called Scent, S-C-E-N-T, as in perfume, and she does these women's breakfasts called Book a Table. And honestly, I would encourage you to go follow her and to sign up for, I think her Book a Tables are finished for this year, but for next year. Her heart is very similar to mine. We have a very similar vision in terms of empowering and inspiring and encouraging women. She is very much active in the abuse space. So her heart is very much for women who've been abused or are in abusive relationships, children, and that kind of thing. And so she did an interview with me yesterday on Dreaming with God. And for those of you who haven't watched it yet, honestly, please go and watch it, because she asked me to do the interview and we spoke about it, and I knew, what I was going to say more or less and everything. But when I actually was speaking to her, the anointing of the Holy Spirit was so strong on me. And I really felt, on both of us, and this was over Zoom, and I really felt God saying that my daughters do not know how to dream with me. And it's because we don't think we should be able to dream, because as women we have been taught that we're supposed to live this life of kind of martyrdom and self-sacrifice, sacrificing ourselves for our children, sacrificing ourselves for our spouses, sacrificing ourselves for our churches and ministries and things like that. And the only person we're supposed to sacrifice ourselves for is actually Jesus. And only things that he calls us to. And when I was talking to Tanya, I just realized that actually for the majority of my life, I'm 52 now, and I would say probably for the first 40 to 43 years of my life, I had no idea that I was even entitled to dream, let alone with God. Life was about existing. And I want to encourage you, especially we're going to talk today about the female heroes of Chanukah. And there are three incredible stories, shocking stories. They're shocking stories, but they are incredible stories of women who stood up in a time where women were just, they weren't given much opportunity to stand up then. And sometimes we have to say things or do things that might come across as shocking, or we are going to say things and do things that not everybody agrees with. And that's okay. We have to be okay with that as women. We need to be okay with the fact that not everyone's going to like us, that not everyone's going to agree with us. But if we feel convicted by the Lord to do or say something, then we need to follow through with that. And we need to dream with Him. And this is a season, ladies, and God has been saying this to me through various people for absolute ages now. It is a season to dream bigger. To dream bigger. If you're dreaming with God and your dream is small, then it's not a God dream. God dreams are scary. God dreams are big. God dreams put us out there, out of our comfort zone, out on the water, with no boat in sight. What's that song? There's that beautiful song about we'll be walking on the water, dancing on the waves. I love that song. And there's so many things that God is moving on in my life at the moment where I feel like I'm dancing on the waves with Him. And then there are moments where I feel like I'm going under, But I just, so anyway, I'm going to move on to the teaching now. But I just wanted to encourage you, if you feel stuck and you feel unable to dream with God, then please watch that video that I released yesterday. Follow Tanya. She's an incredible woman of God. Her own life is such a testimony. And and start dreaming. Use this holiday season to really dream with God, to say to the Lord, what is it that you would have me dream about? What is it that, where are you trying to push me out of my comfort zone? Where are you trying to take me out, from the shoreline onto the waves? What are you trying to do? So let's listen to these three stories of female heroines or heroes, female heroes, attached to the story of Chanukah. Now, we spoke on Tuesday about the Feast of Hanukkah, that it is also known as the Feast of Dedication because it was the rededication of the temple, and it was also known as it is also known as the Feast of Lights. And if you don't know much about Hanukkah, or you're not sure what the story is around there, I would encourage you to go and watch my video from Tuesday morning, and it's on the story of Hanukkah. So please feel free to go and watch that. And so today we are going to speak about three women who played a large part in the freedom and liberation of the Jewish people, and whose names are associated with the festival of Chanukah. Now, some of them, so remember I spoke to you on Tuesday about the Apocrypha. So the story of Chanukah and the story of the Maccabees actually appears in the Apocrypha. There are two books, the first book of Maccabees and the second book of Maccabees. And these stories, the story of Chanukah is in those books, in the Apocrypha, the books that weren't included in the Bible. And some of these women's stories are in the second book of the Maccabees, and then there is another book that wasn't included in the Bible, which is the book of Judith. And Judith's story is one we're going to go over today, and her story is in the Apocrypha as well. Now, the book of Judith, the original, it's lost. It isn't. It's the original book, or the original writings have been lost. So a lot of these stories, they are as factual as I can find. I researched in, very sort of factual spaces in Jewish archives and things like that, and I got the stories that are as close to fact as I can possibly. Morning, Cole. Thank you, my friend. So good to see you. I got the stories as close to fact as I possibly could. So, but some of the stories, the Jewish people have a history of oral tradition as well. So the stories have been passed down through the generations, and they've been altered slightly here or there. And some with one of the stories, no one seems 100% sure who the woman in the story actually was. Some people are very specific, and other articles that I've researched, they say no one actually knows who the woman was. So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because if you go straight after this teaching and you go research these women, you might come across a story that's slightly different to the one I've told you. And if that is the case, just bear in mind that a lot of these stories, as I said, have been passed down through the Jewish oral tradition. They have been, names and things have been lost at their various points. And so this is as close to the historical truth as I could come. So there are 3 women who are associated with Chanukah. And they are considered to be the reason why the women get to light the candles on Chanukah. So women light the Chanukah candles. The other reason, which is a more biblical reason as to why the women light the candles in Chanukah, is because if you remember the story of the golden calf, then you will remember that the men gave their gold jewelry to Aaron to build the golden calf. The women didn't. It actually says in the Bible that the women did not give their jewelry towards the building of the golden calf. And so some rabbis and priests say that because women proved to be more pious and women proved to be more actually honoring of God, and women were more conscious of not worshipping idols in that whole episode with the golden calf, and that's why women light the Chanukah candles. So whichever, it's one of those. It's somewhere there somewhere in those truths is the real story. So the first lady we're going to chat about is a lady called Judith, or her name in Hebrew is Yehudit. And good morning, Jenny. Thank you so much. Yes, it's beautiful here. Hey, wow. So the first lady we're going to talk about is Judith, and her name in Hebrew is Yehudit. But we'll just call her Judith because it's quite a mouthful. And she has a book called the Book of Judith, or the Book of Yehudit, which is in the Apocrypha. And so her story is, no one is 100% sure exactly where in the timeline of Chanukah and all the things that's happened around it when the story happened, in terms of they're not sure whether her story was part of the actual Chanukah sort of feast, but it has been associated with it because her story of bravery and courage had such an impact on the Jewish people. So there was so we all know that Antiochus took over I told you on Tuesday, Alexander the Great conquered a whole lot of places, and Antiochus took over from him, and the Jewish people were allowed to live pretty much in peace, even though the Hellenist or Greek culture they were trying to assimilate the Jewish people into the Hellenist or Greek culture. They were allowed to live pretty much in peace up until Antiochus came into power. And once Antiochus came into power, he was absolutely determined to force the Jewish people to assimilate into the Greek or Hellenist culture of the time. And so one of the ways that they tried to do that was, when they couldn't get the Jewish people to toe the line, they laid siege to their cities. And the one city that they laid siege to was the city of Bethulia. So all they did, because they couldn't overcome the Jewish people within the city, they just laid siege to the city so that they couldn't get water, they couldn't get food. So what they basically were going to do is starve them to death or force them to surrender. And the daughter of the high priest Judith was the daughter of the high priest, or Yehudit. She was the daughter of the high priest of Bethulia. She was apparently beautiful, and she was also a widow. And Holofernes, who was the commander of the time, Holofernes had made it clear that he quite fancied her. And so he was interested in her because she was beautiful and all of that sort of thing. And eventually, when things had gotten so bad in the city, they were starving to death, basically. In Bethulia, they had no food, no water. They were starving to death. The elders all got together, and they said to the Jewish people in the city, they said, if nothing changes within the next 6 days, then we are going to surrender. And apparently, according to the history, Judith was absolutely horrified by this, and she castigated them on their lack of faith. And she said to them, how can you not have faith? How can you just say that you're just going to surrender? How can you be the people that lead us and this is what you want to do? And she asked them for an opportunity to change things. And they said, they were desperate. They said, you can do whatever you want. So what she did was she packed a basket of foodstuffs and she went with, good morning, Arena. She went with her maid and her maidservant, and they walked to out the door of the gates of the city, and they were immediately stopped. And when the soldiers stopped them, she said that she wanted to speak to Holofernes, who was the commander. And the soldiers all knew that this was the high priest's daughter, and Holofernes thought she was beautiful and he quite liked her. And so they escorted her to Holofernes, and she basically struck a deal with Holofernes where she said to him that she will tell him, she said that the Jewish people are starving, and the only animals that would soon be left were non-kosher animals. And once the Jewish people reached the point where they were so starving that they would be forced to eat the non-kosher animals, then basically from a morale point of view, from an everything point of view, they would have reached their end, and she would then tell Holofernes, and Holofernes could come and overtake the city. So she struck this deal with him. And over the next few days, she went in and out, and until the soldiers got used to seeing her, until they obviously the story had circulated that she was going to betray the Jewish people to Holofernes, and she kind of did all of these things until eventually she was accepted and allowed to come and go pretty much as she pleased. And then the one day she came to Holofernes, and she told him that the Jewish people were about to start to eat the non-kosher animals. And so he invited her into his tent so that they could celebrate together. And she had brought with her goat's cheese that she had made, so her own homemade goat's cheese, and heavy wine. And goat's cheese is, the way they made it then in those days, I don't eat goat's cheese, so I don't know if it's still like that, but it's apparently very salty. So he ate, stuffed himself on very salty goat's cheese, got very thirsty, and then she quickly gave him this heavy wine that she had, and he drank this heavy wine, and he'd eaten so much and he drank so much that he passed out. And when he passed out, she took a sword and she chopped his head off. Okay? Then she wrapped his head in a cloth, and she put it back in her basket where the food had been, and she walked back out and back into the city of Bethulia. She went straight to the elders. She gave them Holofernes' head in the basket, and she said to them, now attack the Syrian Greek army, because they're not expecting you to, number one, and number two, they're going to rush to wake up their commander and realize that he's dead. And so the Israelite men, the Jewish men, immediately readied themselves, and they went and attacked the army, laying siege outside. And exactly as she had said, it happened. The Syrian Greek army were taken completely by surprise. They rushed to the commander's tent to wake him up. They realized that Holofernes was actually dead. He'd been beheaded and his head was not there. And they then actually just ran in all different directions. They just ran. They were so completely freaked out by the whole thing that they ran, and the city of Bethulia was saved. And so that this is the story of a woman who took her own life in her hands, who proved to be more courageous than the men and the elders in the Jewish faith in the Jewish city at that time, and risked her life to actually save her people and prevent them from coming under Syrian and Greek rule. And because it happened during that time period when the Greeks were colonizing all of those areas, she is one of the heroes associated with the Feast of Hanukkah, and one of the women that when the Jewish moms and Jewish grannies tell Chanukah stories, Judith's story is one of the stories that they tell their children. It's these three female stories are not stories that have often been passed down. They've been passed down, but what I'm saying is they're not often. It has become more common for Jewish women to tell these stories now, because they want their daughters to know the women that played a huge part in Judaism, because as we know, Judaism is also a very patriarchal religion. and that was never in the heart of God. So, before Judith beheaded Holofernes, Antiochus had passed a law, and this law stated that any Jewish woman or girl who wanted to get married had to allow herself to be violated, raped, have sex with the local Syrian Greek officer or commander of wherever she lived. So any Jewish woman or girl who wanted to get married could not get married a virgin. Morning, sis. So nice to see you. She couldn't get, so he actually passed a law that any Jewish bride was, the law was that she would be violated by a Syrian Greek commander or officer associated with wherever she was before she got married. And this often happened on the wedding night. So on the wedding night, the Jewish people would go through the whole wedding ceremony, and before the wife could go and consummate her wedding with her husband, she had to go and be raped, basically, by this officer. Absolutely demonic. And so now the woman in this story, there doesn't seem to be consensus as to who exactly she was. Some articles say that her name was Hannah, and she was the daughter of the high priest and the sister of Judah and the Maccabee brothers. But quite a few other sources say that she was unnamed, that nobody knows exactly who she actually was. And there is another story about Hannah, who was the daughter of the high priest and the sister of Judah Maccabee, and I'm going to tell that story now. I'm not sure whether the accounts have just gotten confused, but anyway, so some sources say that this girl was Hannah, some sources say she wasn't. So this girl, whoever she was, this unnamed Jewish bride, on her wedding day, they went through the whole ceremony, and they got to the end where the wedding was, the vows, the Jewish priest pronounced the man and wife, and she turned around, faced all the people who'd been invited to her wedding, and stripped naked. She took her wedding gown off, she took whatever she was wearing, she stripped completely naked, and she stood in front of the whole wedding party absolutely naked. And immediately her brothers rushed to the front, and they wanted to kill her because she had brought shame on the family, because, women and being dressed and all of that and nakedness and not, and so her brothers rushed forward, and they were going to kill her because she had now stripped naked in front of this whole wedding party, and she had brought shame on the family. And she turned to them and she said to them, "You would kill me for this? For stripping naked at my wedding and shaming the family, but you're okay with the fact that I now have to go and be violated, raped by this Syrian commander officer? So you're okay with that because it's law, but you're not okay with me." So she did it as an act of defiance, saying that she would rather die, basically. And many accounts say that was where the beginning of the revolt of the Maccabees started, that she caused them all to completely kind of realize that they had been ridiculous, that they hadn't been. She basically said, "You have not protected us. You have not protected your women, your children, your daughters. You have not protected us. You have just allowed this law to be passed and these things to be done, and you haven't stood up for us, but you want to kill me for making a stand." And so many of the accounts say that that's how the revolt of the Maccabees started, that woman's action was so shocking, and so it took them all so completely by surprise and blew them all away, and that they literally rose up straight after that and went and revolted against the Syrian Greek army, and apparently they actually killed the Syrian Greek commander who was going to be the man who violated this woman that night. They killed him first. So again, a woman, she did something immensely shocking. She did something that was completely against every rule, every regulation, everything for her time. But what it did was it woke people up out of their slumber, out of their sleep, out of their acceptance of these cruel and brutal laws that had been passed. It woke them up, and they realized that they couldn't actually go on like this. The fact that they'd accepted that for all of that length of time just blows my mind. Then the last story, the last story I'm going to tell you is just as shocking and just as sad. And I want you to think of these things in our times today, because I just recently watched an interview between Heidi Baker and Randy Clark. And basically Heidi Baker was speaking to Randy Clark about the horrific things that have been perpetrated in Mozambique by ISIS, by Al-Shabaab, by the terror that has just spread across Mozambique, particularly where Heidi Baker is situated, and the things that have been done. So I don't want you to listen to these stories and think that these things are things that happened in the dark ages and they don't happen anymore, because they do happen. They might not be happening here. They might not be happening in beautiful Cape Town right now, but they're happening in the world, and we need to be aware of that. And they might not be happening in exactly the way that we read about them in these stories, but yeah, there are women, there are girls going through things that no woman and no girl should ever have to go through. And yes, we need men to stand up and be counted, and we need men to stand up and support us, and we need men's voices in the gender-based violence space and in the domestic violence space and in the child abuse space. We definitely need that. But until such time as men are shocked or woken up into actually doing something, women are going to have to do it. We need to be the ones. We need to be the ones who, we don't always love militant female movements. We don't love militant feminism, and we don't love the more militant Me Too movement. We're not looking for the emasculation of men. We're not looking for men to be suppressed and oppressed. But sometimes it is things like that. It's that kind of thing that needs to almost shock people into actually realizing that something is wrong with the world and something needs to be done. And as I've said before, and I'll say it again, the church globally has been on the back foot regarding women's rights, regarding equality, regarding, abuse and domestic violence and things like that. The church globally has been on the back foot for far too long. And we as women need to wake it up. I'm not suggesting you strip naked in front of your congregation or anything like that. I'm just saying we need to ask God, how can we be a biblical, godly female response to the feminism movement and to the Me Too movement, but with as much power and as much force as those movements have had, and a better outcome, obviously, with equality for men and women, and not with one gender needing to rule the other. Okay, so this last story, if you're a mom and you have children, this story is honestly going to be one of those. Yes, I agree with you, Arena. Sorry, I need to my eyes. So, this is the story of Hannah. And Hannah's story is told in the second book of the Maccabees, which is part of the Apocrypha. And she apparently was the daughter of the high priest and the sister of Judah Maccabee, the son, the high priest's son who led the revolt of the Maccabees. So she was apparently the sister. And Hannah had 7 sons. Now, amongst the other laws that Antiochus passed in Jewish territory, in what had been previously Jewish territory, he forbade the Jewish people to study the Torah, so they were not allowed to study the Torah, and they were not allowed to not eat pork. So they had to eat pork, they had to eat all of those things. Yes, exactly, Jenny, that is sad. And that's why women need to rise up as well, because we need to actually deal with and speak to women who are involved in these things, women who are still under the influence of patriarchy, women who still willingly expose themselves to misogyny. We need to be truth tellers in this time, and speak truth into women's lives and show them that there's a better way, actually. And that it's not about, as women, we're not supposed to compete, with each other or compare. We're supposed to support, love, empower, and activate, encourage, inspire each other. So Hannah had 7 sons. And because she was the daughter of the high priest, and obviously their family were incredibly, they were birthed into the priesthood and into temple and all of those sorts of things, they did not obey the law that said that you are not allowed to study the Torah and that you have to eat pork and all of those things. They didn't obey it. So what happened was that thousands of Jewish people were arrested and put to death because they insisted on reading the Torah, because they insisted on following the dietary guidelines that God had given them. Thousands of Jewish people were arrested by Antiochus and Holofernes and all of these Syrian Greek commanders, and they were tortured and they were put to death. And so Antiochus was trying to find a way to make the Jewish people assimilate better without having to torture them, because it wasn't a very good PR exercise when thousands of Jewish people are dying and being slaughtered and tortured. And so he figured that if he could get the high priest's daughter and her sons to turn their backs on Judaism, that would then influence the rest of the Jewish people in that area, and they would also turn their backs. So he had Hannah and her 7 sons brought in to his court, and he told them that they had to bow down to an idol. And if they bowed down to an idol, they would be set free. And then he called up Hannah's eldest son, and he said to her eldest son, "You need to bow down to this idol." And he said, "You've been arrested because you insist on reading Torah, because you refuse to eat pork." And what they would do, I think I told you in the last video, is they would slaughter pigs on the altar in the Holy of Holies in the Jewish temple, completely desecrating the temple. And then they would actually cook it, and they would force the Jewish people to sit and eat. And obviously there were people who just went along with things because they didn't, they weren't going to fight and they couldn't bear the persecution. But there were many Jewish people who refused to bow to Antiochus or Holofernes or their new laws, and they lost their lives in the process. So Hannah's eldest son stands before before Antiochus. And Antiochus tells him to bow down to this idol. And the boy quotes the Torah that he will not bow his knee to anyone but God. And so they took him, they cut his tongue out, they chopped off his hands and his feet, and they put him in a vat of boiling water. And they then called the next son up and asked him the same question, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, until they had tortured and killed 6 of Hannah's sons. And all that was left was Hannah and her youngest son. And the Antiochus by now was realizing that this was probably not such a good idea and not very good for his reputation and his publicity, etc. And so he was desperate to convert Hannah and her youngest son. And he called the youngest son up, and he said to the youngest son, "If you will do this, then you will go free, your mother will go free, I will give you everything, wealth beyond your dreams, riches, blah, 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 blah." And then he said to Hannah, "Surely you don't want to lose your last son. Won't you please encourage him to just bow before the idol?" And I don't know, I can't find specific ages of the sons, but I would imagine that he was probably a small boy, like a toddler or a little bit older than that. And Hannah took him to one side and she said to him, do not despair. Do not be put off by what you've watched your brothers go through. Know that you will... sorry. It just makes me want to cry, because I just think of my 3 boys and I wonder how I would have coped with that. And she said to him, you just know that you will stand before God and you will be able to hold your head up high, because you have stood firm in what we believe, and you have stood up for the Most High God. And she encouraged him to not bow before the idol. And he went forward and he said, "I will not bow." And they tortured him to death. And then, according to the story that I read, Hannah died. She held her youngest son. She cradled her youngest son in her arms and died. Some other accounts say that she committed suicide, that she actually leapt off the roof of the building where they were. Some accounts say that she was murdered or martyred by Antiochus, and some accounts say that she just died of just a broken heart. but that her last words were something along the lines of, let me be able to stand before you, Lord, with honor, but knowing that I have sacrificed my 7 sons for you. And Heidi Baker tells the story of this, the horror that has been perpetrated in Mozambique, and the people that are homeless and have been martyred and tortured. And she tells a story about one man who his 4.5-year-old son was beheaded. And he tells Heidi that they couldn't find all the pieces. They couldn't bury the whole body because they couldn't find all the pieces. His 4.5-year-old son. And you know what, ladies? We cannot look away from things like this. We cannot be silent when things like this are happening to women and children. We cannot sit in our safe spaces and our safe homes and be silent in the face of things that are happening in the world just because they're not happening in our nation yet. Persecution is going to come to all of us one way or the other. And if we don't know where we stand or who we stand for or what we stand for, we are going to fall. It says in the book of the Revelation that at the end, even the elect will be deceived. I don't want to be deceived. I don't want to not stand for anything. I want to stand for something. I don't know, and I know what we all think. It's the same thing I think. What can I do? It's such an enormous problem. How can I help? Well, what God has called me to do is to bang the drum for women. To bang the drum for women, and people get irritated. People get irritated by it. Even women. I get the sense where they're like, oh, here she goes again, on the whole women track, or I get the occasional, it happens to men too, God also loves men. And I know God loves men. I know God loves men. I am not anti-man. I'm married to the most amazing man. I'm raising 3 incredible men who know that men and women are equal in the sight of God. I love men. I want my boys to step into everything God has for them. I want my husband to be all that God has called him to be. I want men to take their place where they should be, shoulder to shoulder with women. But until that happens, across the board, across the church, across ministries, until that happens, I'm going to bang the drum for women until God tells me to stop. Because somebody has to. And I'm not the only one doing it, but I do it my way, the way God calls me to do it. So I might not be able to right now be saving somebody out of human trafficking or making a difference to the mothers who have lost their children in Mozambique, or the people who have been martyred in Afghanistan. I might not be able to make an actual difference right now in this moment, but I can raise my voice. I can raise my voice and I can speak it out and I can tell the stories and I can encourage women to stand up and I can activate, empower, inspire, encourage, whatever I can do. God has given me a voice and I can use it. And that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. So when you listen to these stories and you think to yourself, oh my word, like that was terrible, but that was so long ago and that doesn't happen anymore. It happens. It happens today. It happens in our society that we don't even see or we don't even know. And it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. And I said something yesterday on my interview with Tanya, which is probably a tad controversial. I said a couple of things that are probably a tad controversial, and I'm pretty sure that not everyone will agree with me, and that's okay. That's okay. But I said that God values his daughters. He values and loves his daughters as much as his sons. And what that means is he doesn't value church, as we know it, more than his daughters. He doesn't value the institution of marriage as we know it more than his daughters. He doesn't value patriarchy or misogyny more than his daughters. He values his daughters and he wants his best for them. And yes, we all know that the Christian life is not always filled with joy and laughter. There's suffering and there are things that we sacrifice and there are things that we surrender. But we need to make sure as women that we are sacrificing and surrendering for God. Not for man-made structures, not for society or culture's idea of what something should look like. That if we sacrifice or if we surrender for the Most High God only because He has asked us to. Not because there is an expectation from church, from our pastors, from our prophets, from our leaders, from whatever else to do that. I've surrendered everything to God. I have told Him that I will lay my life down for Him. I've laid my children on the altar. I've laid my marriage on the altar. I've laid my dreams, my visions, my anointings, my calling on the altar. Because at the end of the day, it's only about Jesus. It's all about Jesus, and I don't want any of this without Him. And every day is a daily surrender. But I know that I'm surrendering to Jesus. I'm not surrendering to society's expectation of me. I'm not surrendering to the church's expectation of me. I'm not surrendering to any male pastor, prophet, or whatever expectation of what I should be or who I should be or what I should walk in. Only Jesus. Only Jesus. So let us not forget, as we go about our lives, let us not forget that there are women and there are children and who are suffering, who are dying, who are being martyred, who are starving, who are being tortured, and a lot of them, it's for the sake of the gospel. Let us not forget the women who have sacrificed their children for the sake of the gospel, who have sacrificed their husbands, their homes, their lives for the sake of the gospel. Let us not forget, because the world would like us to forget. In the same way that the world would like to tell us that the Holocaust never happened and all of those millions of Jewish people were never slaughtered, the world would like us to forget. We cannot forget, ladies. We cannot forget. We need to be the memorial stones that remember the suffering of women and children who we don't know, and they aren't related to us, and they don't look like us. They're not our color, they're not our culture, they're not any of those things. But they count, because they were made in the image of God, and He loves them. He loves them so much. They count, ladies. They count. So this morning, I just want to decree and declare over you a boldness and a courage that you would feel, sense, experience the roar of the Lion of Judah inside of you, all over you, that if nothing else this morning, you would feel God, that you would feel His pain for His daughters, His wrath for His daughters, His deep, deep, deep love for His daughters. And that same love and that same compassion and that same rising up and wanting to do something to make a difference would rise up inside of you. And that you would not forget. Don't let the world forget. Don't let anybody forget what has been perpetrated against the female gender since the garden. And this is not because we want to walk in unforgiveness or we want to forgive, we want to be healed, we want to be liberated and set free. But we want to also be women whose voices are heard and who remember. So let us walk in everything God has called us to. And don't you let a single person tell you that you are not called to what God has called you to, if you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that is what He has called you to. And let us remember the women and the girls and the children whose lives look hellishly different to ours. And you let that inner Lion of Judah rise up inside of you. And if God calls you to speak out, to speak up, to step up, to step out, you step up, step out, speak up, knowing that I, for one, am rooting for you. I am rooting for you. I am praying for you. I am holding you up. I am right behind you. And hopefully, loads and loads of other women too. So thank you. Thank you for listening to me this morning on this beautiful Thursday morning. Apologies for the emotion, but my heart can't take it sometimes. But I love you all, and I hope you have an incredible day. And I hope that the goodness, the kindness, the mercy, and the grace of God just surrounds you through every moment of today. And I hope that peace and love and joy are your portion. But I pray also that the fire of the Holy Spirit and the roar of the Lion of Judah will be your portion too. Because that, ladies, is how we change the world. Love you, every single one of you. You're beautiful. I appreciate you. And I shall see you